If you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, try talking with one of them in real life.
Welcome to Back in America, the podcast.
Yes, Back in America is back, and for this first episode, we are going undercover with a top-notch journalist. Brandon Koerner, you are an acclaimed journalist and author. You are known for your investigative stories. You graduated from Yale in 1996, and you contribute to top publications such as Wired, The New York Times, and Slate. You published, among others, two fascinating books, Now the Hell Will Start, and The Skies Belong to Us. However, today I would like you to take us through your undercover dive into the world of OnlyFans. In the Wired cover story published in July, you reveal some hidden side of the platform. You expose a surprising truth behind the intimate chat. So welcome to Back in America, Brandon, and thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, as I was saying, you've done some amazing investigative work, including your book, which I referred to, Now the Hell Will Start. And by the way, I would love later on to maybe chat with you about this book. But here, for this OnlyFans story, you didn't have to go to the Burmese jungle. However, you did explore some pretty dark corner of the internet. And for those of us not acquainted with the chat services, can you tell us what OnlyFans is?
Sure. So OnlyFans is a platform that basically connects primarily adult performers with subscribers. So you'll have a lot of these OnlyFans creators, mostly women, who you can subscribe to their channel for, say, $11, $15 a month, and you have access to a wide variety of explicit content, photos, videos. But there's another benefit, which is that being a subscriber gives you the right to direct message the creator. And so you can kind of have a chatting relationship, and that creates a real bond. So it's not just the same thing as looking for pornographic material on some dodgy website. You're basically looking at one creator's content and then being able to chat back and forth with them. And the idea being that they want to create customer loyalty and a stronger affinity between the subscriber and the creator.
Right. So are most of those chat intimate and sexual, or is it about anything and everything?
It's really a wide variety. So certainly you have, I wouldn't say a majority, but it can be sometimes, are just men looking for sexting style conversations to be sexually aroused and stimulated. But sometimes it's just men trying to talk about what a cruddy day they had or the problems they're encountering or some book they're reading that they're really interested in. It can be a cure for loneliness sometimes. And I believe actually these subscribers use it often in both ways, that sometimes they'll use it strictly to be aroused and to reach sexual climax. And sometimes they just want someone to talk to and just alleviate their loneliness.
And you say men, so am I right in thinking that most of the stars are women and most of the people subscribing are men?
Yeah, that's right. So it's not right to say that that's everyone. There are certainly different kinds of creators on there, but I would say the vast majority are female creators catering to just a straight male audience.
All right. So let me ask you, you're a journalist, you are married, you are the father of two, you did some amazing investigative journalist, and here you are diving into the world of OnlyFans. How did you get acquainted with this industry?
Yeah, so actually last year I had occasion to have a conversation with a woman who's an OnlyFans creator, and we were talking a bit, and I was really interested in her life and her job. She had been I believe it was software engineering, and she was going to go and get a job as a tech consultant in Seattle.
Sorry, how did you get to meet that person to start with?
Oh, sure. I was working on a different story, and it just happened to be somebody that was tangentially involved with the story. Okay. And so we were having a conversation, and she mentioned to me in the course of saying how she had abandoned her goal of becoming a tech consultant to do this OnlyFans thing because it was so lucrative, and that she was making a ton of money doing this. And she had so many subscribers that she'd actually hired a management agency to assist her with running her business. The same way like an actor or athlete would kind of have a management agency to handle endorsements and all the ins and outs and details of business. She hired an agency to do that for her, and she gives them a cut percentage of her revenue. That was pretty expected. I knew that was part of the business. But one thing she mentioned to me is like one of the really nice parts, or maybe the nicest part, is that this management agency provides her with chat specialists that essentially that instead of her having to respond to all these direct messages from her subscribers, those direct messages go to a team of contractors. And this was a team that's actually based in Mexico. And they respond in the voice or by impersonating her. When I thought about it, of course, that makes sense. Of course, that these really successful OnlyFans models have so many subscribers, they couldn't possibly keep pace with all the contacts they get. But I was really interested as someone who is a writer, what kind of creative challenge is this for someone who is a freelancer, maybe in a different country, maybe doesn't speak English as a first language, has to impersonate this model so perfectly that the subscriber never doubts that they're really talking to the real McCoy. So that's really what sparked my interest in this world. And so as a journalist, of course, my first thought was, well, why don't I go out and I'll interview a bunch of these chatters and I'll see what their lives are like and what this is like for them. But it turned out to be really hard. A lot of chatters didn't want to talk to me. There's really no upside for them. They are meant to be anonymous.
How do you start looking for someone who is a chatter?
So I basically went online to the forums where they congregate. There's a lot of them on Reddit, on Facebook. And so I would just kind of DM them and ask like, hey, I'm a journalist. I'd love to talk to you about this. I didn't really get many responses. I got a few. I was able to interview a few, but they weren't the richest interviews of all time. I wasn't really fleshing out the story in the way I wanted. So I kind of had this eureka moment several months ago where I said, well, maybe the solution here is that I go undercover and I get this job myself. And that's the way I can really understand what it takes and what the ins and outs of this industry are. So that led to this long, extended jaunt through the world of OnlyFans and trying to get that job that would allow me to experience that firsthand.
So, and the first job you get, so if I go back through your story, you started chatting with a guy in Argentina.
Yeah, it was actually, this is one of the chatters. It's actually a woman that I was able to chat with in Argentina. She was probably the best interview. I would have loved to have written about her more. She was really interesting. She's someone who actually, I met her through Reddit, and she had actually made a post on Reddit about a really negative experience she'd had with a management agency. So the agencies hire the chatters. One thing I should emphasize is that as a chatter, you have no contact with the creators or the models. Everything is through the agency. And so she'd been hired by an agency and they had treated her really badly. They hadn't paid her what she was owed and it just was a whole mess. So she'd posted about that and I contacted her and she actually let me use part of that interview in the story. It was very interesting because I saw what it took, and she was someone who was a university student, also worked part-time in a pizza shop, and then the rest of her time was spent chatting to support herself. So she said she basically didn't sleep. Yeah, basically didn't sleep. And she was studying in technology, and her background that qualified her was that she'd always been a writer. She wrote erotica. She wrote like fan fiction about video games. So she was a good writer. That's a really important skill. You have to be able to communicate with the written word to be convincing. So she kind of had an ideal background and gave me a lot of tips that proved useful to me as I got deeper into this industry.
I was surprised to hear that you were too much of a good writer, right? Your punctuation was too accurate.
That's one thing that they tell you is that you have to chat in the style of the creator or the model. So they give you lots of material to kind of imitate their voice, and they're chatting in a very casual way, and they're not using punctuation right all the time, and they're not spelling things right all the time. I think that's one thing I got dinged for pretty early on was my grammar was too good, and I used like semicolons or em dash or something like that, or whatever it was that was almost too perfect and therefore wasn't as convincing. So I had to often remind myself to be sloppier in my writing.
So the first job you get is actually not really chatting with a human being, but training an AI.
Yeah, and that's what's so I thought I would just stroll in and get an OnlyFans chat job right away, but there was a real catch-22 to it, which is that what I've quickly discovered that it's not as much of a writing job as it is a sales job. So in these chats, as I discovered, it's not just about providing intimacy or services to these subscribers. It's about upselling them. It's about trying to sell them additional content that's not available on the main channel through these chats. And so everywhere I went, I thought I would stroll in speaking English so well and with my background and everything. And everyone was like, well, give us proof of past sales you've made, of past jobs you've had where you've sold. And I didn't have that. But of course, I can't get that until I'm hired. So I was a real conundrum of how do I start off in this industry? I kept on applying places, and I finally got some interest from a company that is incorporated in Cyprus, but based in Serbia. And they weren't quite in the OnlyFans business, not really. They were in the business of creating AI that will, they hope, someday replace human chatter. So they needed with someone to write lots of dialogue, so both sides of imaginary chats that they would then use to train their bot and hopefully get it fluid enough where it will be able to replace humans someday. So my first assignment was basically write 40-line dialogues between yourself and this imaginary kind of OnlyFans creator named Miko. And here's all Miko's interests. They gave me a dossier about her. And I basically just had to write both sides of chats that I thought might unfold on OnlyFans. So it was quite challenging having to do both sides, and it's pretty exhausting in the end. I got through a few rounds, and they were loading me down with work. They obviously needed tons and tons of dialogues. The more, the better, because the more material you have, the more rapidly you can train the AI. So they were like, well, write like 40-line dialogues of sex in a car, and then 10 40-line dialogues of sex on a beach. And I think by the fourth assignment, I was absolutely mentally exhausted from doing it. And I realized that this wasn't really what I was supposed to be doing with my time. I was supposed to be working towards interacting with actual human beings. So I resigned from that job. They were very nice about it, but they never did pay me the money they owed me. But the upside was that I now had some experience, that I now had something I could show to potential employers and say, hey, I know I don't have exactly what you're looking for, but I do have experience in this industry working for a company where I was fairly successful.
And you did land a job. That's where you started.
So I looked around, but I eventually first I took a test for a management agency, and I passed the test, and I thought that I would immediately go into chatting, but in fact, they placed me in a training program. And so I was admitted to a Discord server where I had to attend these training sessions.
Oh, with Luca, right?
With Luca, yes. This very, very charismatic veteran chatter. Unlike a lot of chatters, he was American. I found that a lot of chatters are based in Philippines, Venezuela, places where young people go to university and learn really good English, but the economic situation and the wages is not great, and the wages are lower than in the US. But this guy was based in the US, and I went to his training sessions, and he was a real character and taught me a lot about what the industry was. And he's really the one who showed me how upselling works and how much of these chats is focused on upselling and getting tips and making revenue.
Would you say it's really psychological manipulation?
That's a great question. So you are providing a service that people really want, and they're getting what they want out of it. So the men are, if they're doing it sexually, they are achieving orgasm through these chats. If they're looking for companionship, they're getting that. They're buying these videos. I wouldn't do it myself. I think they're overpriced, and having seen everything behind them.
How much is a video?
So it depends on the creator. So that's a great question. So really, of course, it's pure capitalism. It's what the market will bear. But when I eventually got the job that I spent all my time in, so we topped out at $45 for a video. So essentially, I'd usually start with like just a photo or a photo set. There might be like maybe sometimes I'd do a freebie to start, then maybe do $10, and then you work your way up. And the most explicit content we charged was $45. But
Okay.
later on, I was looking into working for a more popular creator, one of the top OnlyFans creators in the world. And I was able to shadow a chatter that she used. And he was charging $200 for every video, for everything. And that's really the maximum that OnlyFans will let you charge. And everything he sold was $200. So that's where you get into the big money and big revenue for some of these creators. And they're certainly making millions of dollars a year in revenue.
So yeah, I jumped from the training to the actual job, but after the training on Discord, you did land a full-time job. Was it full-time or was it in the evening?
Yeah, sure. So we do 8-hour shifts. So you basically have
Okay.
3 chatters working per day, 8 hour in 8-hour shifts. So I was hired by a German agency. It's a place that I had actually applied to early in the process and that I had seemed promising, but then I hadn't heard from them for a while. And I guess they had a hole in their calendar. Someone had probably resigned or quit or whatever. And so they had an 8-hour shift. It was the night shift. So it was not the worst shift, but it was 4 till midnight was the shift that I took. And yeah, they basically threw me in the deep end almost right away. So they sent me a dossier. I think it was 12 pages that included a Q&A with the creator. And so I kind of knew what her likes and dislikes were. She talked about what words she uses, what words she doesn't, what emojis are off limits, what emojis she likes, what her chatting style is. It was basically just a quickie biography of her. And I obviously checked out her Instagram and her TikTok and all that so I could understand who I'm trying to impersonate. But it's a 21-year-old woman who claimed to be a computer engineering student. And yeah, pretty soon, I think it was only like a day or two after I was contacted, I was on my first shift.
Is it intimidating to start chatting with someone faking to be a 21-year-old woman? I mean, did you go back to your notes? Did you learn them by heart? How much did you put into it?
I mostly learned them by heart. Again, it was only 12 pages, so I could learn most of it. I did keep the document open. I had to refer back to it a few times. I remember messing up one thing in particular that someone asked me, I remember she said that her parents had a jukebox when she was growing up. And so she loved classic rock because that was the music she had. And that was in a conversation somehow. And somebody asked me what my favorite band was. And I completely blanked on what she'd said. And I didn't have time to look back through all my tabs. So I said Led Zeppelin, but it was actually Pink Floyd. So hopefully they didn't catch
not
that.
too far.
But I did memorize most of it, and yeah, it was hard at first. I mean, it's a lot. You're doing multiple conversations at once, right? So when I first started that first shift, I can't remember the exact number, but I probably had 80 or 90 unread messages in my mailbox when I started the shift, and you have to go through all of them and respond to everyone, and it's hard to juggle all of that. Not everyone responds to you. Some people have logged off or. We also have a ranking system. So essentially the 2 kinds of people that we have in that world, we call them brokies and ballers. So a brokie is someone who wants to chat but doesn't really buy content or hasn't tipped or just isn't a big source of revenue. Or we have ballers, are people that have a proven track record of buying content. And we have notes about all of them. So every time we learn something new about one of our clients, we would write it into the notes field of the management software we had. So we got to know what their jobs were, what their likes or dislikes were, what problems they had in their lives, and then what content they had bought. So kind of what their fetishes were and things like that. We had a lot of information, especially if you've been a long-time subscriber. We had a lot of data about you.
It's like a hotline or customer support where you can go the cases. And so how many people did you chat at the same time with?
So I would say simultaneously, I mean, maybe 24 at the most. It came in waves. I would usually focus most intently on the ballers. So if you're someone who's spent a lot of money on the account, then you're obviously going to get more attention from me than someone who's never really spent money outside the subscription fee. So some were lighter lifts than other, I guess you can say.
It must be intellectually really challenging.
It was, yeah. It was
you
hard.
want to have quality conversation with those guys.
Yeah, just because the conversation is so different, right? So
Yeah.
you'll have some guys who are just want to have extremely explicit chats, pornographic chats, and some guys who want to talk about like, I mean, there's some people who want like a girlfriend experience, which is they want to talk about going on dates and going to dinner and romantic stuff. And then some people just want to like vent about their boss was mean to them at work. And like I had philosophical discussions with people. I talked to people about just our travels or their travels mostly, I guess. And that was,
I,
yeah, it was a really wide
I,
range. And some of it was really filthy. Some of it was very dirty.
I read your comment about the state trooper. Do you want to share
Yeah, this was
that
one of my
experience?
clients. This was a good client of mine. So this guy was a New Mexico state trooper, and he would actually chat with me while he was on the job. He would usually log on about, I guess he's whatever, 2 or 3 hours behind me. I'm on the East Coast, he's in New Mexico. And so he would log on at the beginning of his shift and he wasn't, he was out there trying to catch drunk drivers. But he would try to talk to me. He would chat with me from the police car he was in, which I thought was pretty crazy that he's supposed to be out there catching intoxicated drivers and he's talking to me and buying content. I asked him one night, I was like, what do you like most? He said, like, driving a really cool cop car and shooting my gun. So it was just funny that, he was pretty proud of himself for being a cop, but I'm sure his supervisors would not be thrilled to hear he was chatting on
Yeah.
OnlyFans while on the clock.
So how much does a chatter makes a month, more or less?
Yeah. So this is the thing. So again, it varies a lot by how experienced they are and how much commission they're making. So really the way you make a decent living is by getting commission off upselling content. But when that job that I had, I didn't make any commission. They just paid me $4 an hour. And so not a lot of money. I mean, not real money, especially for someone in a high wage country. When I started interviewing and going through the training process for this higher profile job, theirs was $5 an hour, but plus a commission. I believe it was 1% or something like that. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but I definitely saw chatters on that account sell $1,000 of content, no problem. So in a pretty limited time. So they said that, and of course, if you perform, you can get raises. And really, what you want is raises. The hourly rate means nothing. It's the commission. It's very much a commission-based enterprise.
So do you think someone in a country like the US could make a living out of it, or is it really limited to low-wage countries?
I think you could only if you were working for a top model and you were working on a commission basis. And I saw the figures. I saw people spend tens of thousands of dollars a month.
That was going to be my question. Yeah. That's crazy, right?
I saw it with my own eyes. So the model I was impersonating, she wasn't quite in that tier yet. Like I said, her top content sold for 45. So I saw people there that were clearly spending hundreds, if not over 1,000 a month. But, for this bigger creator that I was training for the job, people were spending thousands, if not tens of thousands, her hardcore clients per month. And I could see it. I saw the revenue figures. So wouldn't surprise me at all to know that woman was walking away with $5 to $7 million a year.
Whoa. So now, how do you feel ethically about being a man, claiming to be a young woman, chatting to men about their sexual fantasy? And I mean, you're definitely not a woman, so you are making up whatever it is, and it feels like to be a woman.
Yeah.
You're impersonating a woman. I mean, it's sort of disturbing to me. How was it to you?
It could be emotionally harrowing at times. I think the ethical question, my job as a journalist is to reflect the world and show what the world is really like. And so this is what this world is really like. And so the fact that I was doing this in service of doing that, I didn't really have an ethical problem with it. I think there is a question, is this fraud? Is this fraudulent? Are people, you mentioned psychological manipulation earlier. I think that the flip side of that is like, are these people would they not give the money if they knew that the people they're chatting to are not the person they see on their screen. And in fact, I talk in the story, one of the ways I wrap up the story is I talk to a class action attorney who's in the planning phases to sue both OnlyFans, the platform, and some of the big management agencies as a class action fraud suit on behalf of subscribers, saying, well, these people have an expectation that they're actually talking to and being stimulated by the people they see on the screen, and there's no honesty about who's really doing the chat, and there's no transparency. I think the flip side of that, and I thought about this a lot, and I don't have a great answer, but when I chatted with these men, like, some were definitely strange individuals and eccentric, but a lot of them just seemed like normal, intelligent, gainfully employed, functioning members of society. And I think that if they stop to really think about it, of course they would figure out they're not really talking to the person they see on the screen. I think a lot of them know it on some level and just don't really put any mental bandwidth towards it because this relationship they've developed is important to them. And if they do have to think about it, this thing will be stripped away from them. And so I think there's a lot of ignorance is bliss thinking going on among the clientele.
It was one of the comments I saw. I went to the online version of your story on Wired, and some of the comments were exactly that.
Yeah.
Like, those guys, they know.
Yeah.
If they wanted, they couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it mean in terms of the world we live in and the US society? I think you mentioned that in the story. Is it linked to the feeling of loneliness?
I think that we're in an era where parasocial relationships have become so important to the way we define ourselves. There is loneliness. I think that something has happened in society now that we're intermediating so much of our lives through screens. We don't create the same kind of communal connections that we used to. I think people are less comfortable in public spaces and less comfortable in establishing rapport with people in the physical world. And as a result, I think there is a problem with loneliness. And that's why we develop parasocial relationships with people that we hear on podcasts or what have you. And this is taking it a step beyond where it's not like you don't just have to imagine a relationship with this person you see on the screen. We're giving you context. We're giving you a much more of an emotional connection through these chats. So it's capitalizing on this, the advent of the parasocial relationship and making it that bond even more intimate through the chatting. Certainly, I think it's a problem that we have. I think that we've gotten so away from having a community that we used to know where flesh and blood relations matter. So we have these relations instead. And I would say that they are more problematic because they become more abusive or they become more exploitative because you can't look the person in the eye and really get to know them in the same way as you could 10, 20, 30 years ago.
And when you think about it, you do have some kind of communication and exchange, but it's not even with the person you think you're having it with.
Right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, and I did feel emotion. That's what's so strange is that there's a couple times when someone would chat with me and I'd feel like, wow, I'm moved by what you said, or you made me think in a different way. And I feel an emotional connection, but I can never press forward with that, or I can never really say what's really on my mind because I'm pretending to be somebody else. It was disorienting. I talk in the story about one time, I'm a father, and there was one of my clients was a truck driver who was a single dad, and he was saying that he was exhausted because his son, very young, I think maybe 3 years old or something like that, had been up all night with night terrors, and he just was beside himself because he couldn't comfort his son. And like all I wanted to do was talk to him about being a dad and being a dad of slightly older kids and how you'll get through this, and talk about things that were meaningful to me on a personal level. And it was kind of frustrating and kind of sad that I couldn't do that because I was really there to sell him stuff.
And you were a 21-year-old woman.
And I was a 21-year-old woman. Yes, exactly.
God. And so what will happen once, because certainly they're going to switch to AI chatbot, right? So, I mean, that At least you are a human being chatting with other humans,
Yeah.
but replace it with an AI. What happens?
It's tough to say. I do think, having gone through all of this, I think that AI replacing humans in this space might be farther away than we think. We're always told, like, oh, AI is going to take over all chat functions within 12 to 18 months. But when I really think about the way that I did it and the way that I had to establish these relationships and respond with a human touch, I don't think these clients would be satisfied with where AI technology is right now. I know they wouldn't. They're looking for something a little deeper. And I feel like right now humans have an edge. I talk to people in the industry about this. They say it's coming, but it might be like 4 or 5 years for it to really replace humans.
Okay. So we still have 4 or 5 years of real human bonding.
Sure. Of being chatters, yeah.
Yeah, which is good. Maybe 2 questions before we end this interview. We're getting at the end of it. Lesson learned. Is there any key lesson you got out of this experience? And yeah, how long was it altogether?
So I basically worked on the story for, I believe it was 6 months. So It was a pretty long process. I'm really fortunate in that Wired really supported me throughout this, even when I was running into lots of dead ends with applying for jobs. They told me to keep going. So I'm really grateful for their support and the time they gave me to do this story the right way. I mean, in terms of lessons learned, I mean, one is I think you identified that there's something a little broken about relationships right now, and the fact that men are seeking a salve for their loneliness and their problems in a place that's not designed for that at all, in a place that's really designed just to take the money out of their wallets. I think it's hard not to find that a little dismal. And I did think a lot about what's the solution to that. How do we make it so people do feel connected to others who actually will genuinely care for them? That's a real conundrum for the years going forward in an increasingly screen-mediated world. That's one. I think, two, I just learned a lot about sales and just the psychology of sales. I've never been involved in sales. I've been fortunate to basically be involved in journalism and writing ever since college. So I never went through the sales process. And I learned a lot about how you form emotional connections with people to make them spend money when they really don't want to. And so that, I think, is going to inform some of my storytelling and some of my investigations going forward.
And maybe you pitching your stories differently.
Maybe it'll help me in that regard, yes.
All right. And finally, so this podcast is called Back in America. And my last question is always, what is America to you?
America to me is obviously the country of my birth. It's the country I love so much because I feel like the American ideal is what should be emulated, is that like anyone can be an American, and that our founding principle is that we can, and we've definitely undermined this with our behavior a lot, but I feel like the fundamental value is that we embrace all, that anyone, that it's not defined by ethnicity or history or background, that our fundamental ideal is that we're a place where anyone can become an American. And I firmly do believe that if other countries adopted that attitude a little bit more, the world would be a slightly brighter, more loving place. So I guess that's what to me, it's an ideal that I believe in action.
Thank you, Brandon. Before I let you go, I want to come back to this book, Now the Hell Will Start.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like mesmerized by the story.
Yeah, so Now the Hell Will Start, it's a World War II story. It's primarily set along a road that was called the Lido Road, which ran from northeast India, the very northeast corner of India, through northern Burma, and then up to China. And the idea was that this would be a way to keep the Free Chinese Allies supplied from the British territory of India. And so what the Americans did is they shipped a lot of soldiers out there, primarily Black American soldiers. At the time, it was a segregated army. And so you had these, and essentially they would give generally the Black American units the worst, most labor-intensive jobs. And so the story is about a soldier in one of these units, a man named Herman Perry, who was shipped out to help build this road from India primarily through Burma and then to the Chinese border. And he's there and he has a really terrible, harrowing experience. And then kind of in a has a mental breakdown and ends up killing one of his commanding officers. And knowing that he will be hanged for this offense if he's caught, he runs off into the jungle in Burma and actually ends up encountering and then marrying into one of the hill tribes up there known as the Naga. So it's really his journey from Washington, D.C., where he'd been living prior to the war, to this theater, this kind of little-known theater of World War II, to terrible jungle environment, and then kind of finding a new identity, a new life in this small village in the Burmese wilderness in 1944-45.
Fascinating. And that was the first book you wrote?
That was the first book, yes.
Yeah, amazing story for a first book. So no spoiler. However, I would love to have you on another episode to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back and talk about it.
Amazing. Well, Brannon, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I hope you've enjoyed this interview. I will soon release a conversation with Tamar Huggins, who is currently working on more inclusive AI. I will also have a deep interview with Dr. Andrea Shankar on helping your loved one die at home. Many more exciting interviews are scheduled, so subscribe so you never miss an episode.